Oliver Bennet stood at attention beneath the majestic, vaulted ceiling of Windsor Castle's grand ballroom. His posture was impeccable, his uniform crisply ironed, the golden buttons polished until they mirrored the flickering light of the chandeliers above. Yet despite the ceremonial splendor around him, Oliver's heart pounded with nervous anticipation, his chest constricted by emotions far greater than those he had ever experienced beneath his meticulously worn uniform. Today, the spotlight would shine not on his disciplined march, nor on the prideful bearing of his shoulders, but rather on a journey that had quietly unfolded, reshaping his very soul. The crowd murmured in gentle anticipation, the whispered excitement reverberating through the grand hall, bouncing softly from one gilded wall to another. Elegant guests dressed in silk gowns and finely tailored suits exchanged subtle nods, their eyes glittering with intrigue and curiosity. Oliver felt a sense of surreal detachment. He had walked these halls many times, disciplined and resolute, yet today he sensed that everything had irrevocably changed. He knew the eyes upon him were not scrutinizing a royal guard's flawless appearance, but rather looking deeper, beneath the medals and uniform, seeing instead the heart of the man whose actions had unwittingly ignited an emotional revolution in the hearts of so many. Oliver inhaled deeply, the fragrance of freshly cut roses and polished oak subtly anchoring him to reality. His eyes darted momentarily across the crowd and settled upon a single empty space near the stage, a stark and unsettling absence. The spot was reserved for Emily Hartfield, the courageous young woman whose quiet strength had touched him so deeply and altered the trajectory of his carefully structured life. His stomach tightened at the emptiness. Doubt crept insidiously through him. Would Emily arrive? Could she possibly overcome all the daunting hurdles placed cruelly before her, hurdles society had unfairly erected, threatening to extinguish the brilliant flame of her dreams? But Oliver clung desperately to hope, recalling Emily's determined eyes, a powerful blend of vulnerability and strength, every time she spoke about her dreams of dancing. Oliver remembered vividly her determination, the sheer force of will that had captivated him and driven him to stand up against rigid rules, unbending hierarchy, and harsh judgment. He remembered the countless sleepless nights he had endured, haunted by the bitter words of his superiors, the threat of dismissal hanging mercilessly above him. All this he had borne willingly, a burden carried not out of duty, but out of empathy, an emotion Oliver had rarely allowed himself to openly embrace until Emily had entered his life. Suddenly, an electric hush descended upon the hall. Oliver's breath caught sharply in his chest. At the far end of the ballroom, beneath the ornate archway framed with fresh flowers, Emily emerged, her wheelchair gracefully pushed forward by her mother, Margaret. The instant Oliver saw Emily, elegantly dressed in a delicate pale blue gown, her gentle smile radiant yet tinged with vulnerability, he felt his throat tighten. His eyes blurred with tears of relief and admiration, pride and overwhelming emotions surging through him. For months he had fought tirelessly, bearing unfair reprimands, enduring ridicule, only to witness this breathtaking moment of justice unfolding before him. As Emily slowly approached the center of the hall, her soft eyes met Oliver's gaze. For a brief, charged moment, the ballroom seemed to dissolve, leaving only the silent connection between these two souls who had forever changed each other's lives. The intensity of that instant carried an unspoken acknowledgement, gratitude, trust, and something deeper, intangible but profoundly powerful. Oliver felt a sense of profound karma resonate deep within him. For all the trials he had suffered, all the injustices endured, this single, precious moment felt like a divine balance being delicately restored. The music swelled gently from the orchestra, a hauntingly beautiful melody filling the space between them. Emily took a deep breath, nodded softly to her mother, and to the astonishment of every soul present, rose from her wheelchair with carefully measured strength. Gasps echoed throughout the room as Emily, with determined grace, steadied herself, placing a trembling hand lightly upon Oliver's shoulder. Oliver felt the weight of her trust, felt the symbolic power of this gesture, the absolute, heart-stopping beauty of a dream fiercely protected and courageously fought for. Together, they moved slowly into a gentle, yet profoundly emotional dance. Each careful step Emily took was a powerful defiance against all those who had dismissed her dreams as impossible, each graceful movement a triumph of spirit over circumstance. The guests watched silently, tears glistening openly in their eyes, captivated by the potent symbolism unfolding before them. Justice finally being delivered, karma finally answering the silent, hopeful prayers whispered by a heart so wrongly dismissed and misunderstood. Amid this extraordinary display, Oliver glanced briefly toward the far corner of the ballroom, his eyes catching sight of the rigid, humbled figure of Sergeant Arthur Colburn. The man who had once harshly judged and nearly destroyed Oliver's career now watched silently, his proud stance softened, eyes shimmering with tears of remorse and profound humility. Oliver felt a sense of bittersweet triumph, knowing that even those who had once been cruelly dismissive now felt deeply the stirring touch of empathy, the undeniable truth that compassion was, after all, the most noble uniform anyone could ever wear. As their dance came slowly to an end, Emily looked up at Oliver, gratitude etched profoundly into her expressive eyes, shimmering with tears of pure joy. "Thank you, Oliver," she whispered, barely audible above the gentle applause growing throughout the hall. Oliver simply smiled softly in return, his heart swelling with emotions he could scarcely name. He knew then, more clearly than ever, that the true honor of his position was not found in ceremonial uniforms or disciplined drills, but in standing bravely for justice and compassion, no matter how overwhelming the odds. Oliver gently assisted Emily back into her chair, his eyes briefly meeting Margaret's, who quietly wept tears of pride and relief. As the hall erupted into enthusiastic applause, Oliver felt a profound sense of peace washing gently through him, knowing deeply and unshakably that his sacrifices had been worthwhile. Yet amidst this celebratory atmosphere, he sensed a quiet tension hovering just beyond the glow of the moment, a hint that even now, unseen challenges might yet arise. After all, karma, while often kind, never fully revealed the complexities of its path. As the applause gradually softened, Oliver's heart tightened once more, an unsettling intuition whispering quietly to him that this moment, though beautiful, was merely the delicate prelude to another, even more powerful revelation that awaited them all. Oliver felt a subtle shiver trace his spine, the gentle whisper of uncertainty reminding him sharply that life was rarely predictable, and that karma often concealed mysteries waiting to unfold. He knew instinctively that while justice had smiled upon him tonight, tomorrow would bring new challenges, new trials, and perhaps even deeper revelations about those he had come to trust. And as Oliver stood silently in the ballroom's golden glow, he understood deeply and unmistakably that his story and Emily's was far from over, and that fate had merely paused to breathe before the next chapter, perhaps even more dramatic, revealed itself in ways none could yet imagine. Oliver Bennet stood quietly in the gardens behind Windsor Castle, where evening shadows danced softly beneath the dimming sky. The day's grandeur was now a fading echo, the grand ceremony concluded, and the ornate ballroom emptied of its glittering guests. Here, in the solitude of twilight, Oliver's carefully composed facade finally slipped away, leaving him alone with the flood of raw, unguarded emotion that had held at bay throughout the ceremony. His heart felt heavy, filled with gratitude, pride, and a lingering sense of vulnerability, as if the entirety of the day's events had lifted a veil, leaving him exposed to both the beauty and cruelty of life's inevitable truths. In the quiet of these historic gardens, the fragrance of blooming roses mingled with the faint scent of damp earth, stirring deep memories he had long forgotten. Oliver breathed deeply, trying to steady his restless thoughts. He was startled by the soft rustling of leaves near his feet, drawing his gaze downward to a small, trembling creature, a fragile and disheveled young fox, shivering and clearly frightened. Its reddish-brown fur was damp, streaked with mud, and its amber eyes wide with exhaustion. The sight struck Oliver deeply, tugging at an almost forgotten corner of his heart where innocence and compassion still flourished. Instantly, Oliver knelt gently beside the tiny animal, his instincts driving him to reach out with care. The young fox recoiled initially, wary of human kindness, its wide eyes reflecting a history of fear and mistrust, a poignant mirror of Emily's initial wariness of the world around her. Oliver spoke softly, his voice low and calming, infused with empathy as he whispered soothing words of reassurance. The fox hesitated briefly, uncertain, before cautiously allowing Oliver's gentle hand to stroke its fur. At that tender touch, a profound calm seemed to envelop the small creature, as if recognizing instinctively the safety of the compassionate heart that reached out to protect it. In this quiet and unexpected exchange, Oliver felt a potent wave of reflection surge through him, a resonant reminder of all that he had endured, moments of isolation and judgment, the biting sting of unjust condemnation from colleagues who had ridiculed him for his compassion, his tenderness toward Emily. Here, holding this vulnerable creature, Oliver saw clearly the powerful symbolism, the undeniable evidence that life, in all its complexities, inevitably returned to us the kindnesses and cruelties we imparted upon others. The gentle creature in his hands became a living testament to karma, reminding Oliver that compassion, no matter how quietly extended, would one day return in forms equally tender. His thoughts drifted to Sergeant Arthur Colburn, whose stony-hearted pride had caused Oliver such pain, whose harsh judgment had nearly destroyed all he cherished. Oliver wondered if Arthur had ever known such moments of humility and compassion, or if life's harsh lessons were just now beginning to teach him the consequences of his actions. It was the brutal yet undeniable fairness of karma, thought Oliver, knowing in his heart that Arthur's soul was only now beginning its journey toward redemption. As Oliver carefully lifted the young fox into his arms, he felt the creature's heart beating frantically, its delicate body frail and fragile. Yet, Oliver was filled with a quiet strength, understanding profoundly that he had been entrusted with this creature's care for a purpose deeper than chance alone. His careful embrace of this helpless animal mirrored precisely the manner in which he had once embraced Emily's dreams, dreams dismissed unfairly by a world blind to the strength hidden within vulnerability. Oliver knew now more clearly than ever that this small act of kindness was a powerful echo of the justice and compassion he had struggled so fiercely to uphold. Carrying the fox toward shelter, Oliver's steps slowed as a shadow moved silently from beneath the garden archway, causing him to pause, alert and curious. Emerging quietly, with head slightly bowed, was none other than Arthur Colburn himself, the man whose presence had once filled Oliver with dread. Arthur's usually proud and commanding posture was now replaced by a subdued humility, an unfamiliar softness etched into his aging features. The older man glanced uncertainly at Oliver, then at the fox in his arms, visibly struggling for words. Oliver watched silently, feeling an unexpected empathy toward this man who had once been his tormentor. Arthur's voice trembled slightly as he finally spoke. "I watched you earlier, Oliver, in the ballroom. I saw what you did for Emily, and I see now how you handle even this tiny creature. You possess something I've long forgotten, or perhaps something I've never truly understood." Arthur's eyes, usually stern and unforgiving, were now glistening faintly, reflecting emotions previously hidden behind the strict walls of duty. "I've caused you pain, Oliver, pain you never deserved, and for that I'm deeply sorry." Oliver stood silently, the unexpected confession momentarily overwhelming him. A profound karmic justice resonated powerfully within him. The same man who had mocked his compassion, who had scorned and belittled his integrity, now stood humbled, openly acknowledging the wrongs he had inflicted. Oliver felt no vindication, only quiet gratitude, and the deep understanding that true justice was neither loud nor triumphant, but gentle and deeply humane. Arthur hesitated, seemingly uncertain, before continuing in a voice barely above a whisper. "Many years ago, Oliver, I abandoned a small animal injured outside these very walls. I dismissed the event as trivial, beneath my dignity as a royal guard. Yet tonight, seeing you care for this fox with such unconditional kindness, I'm confronted once more with my own failure, a failure to extend compassion when it was most needed." Arthur's words trembled slightly, betraying a profound regret. "Perhaps today, karma finally shows me what I once refused to see." Moved deeply, Oliver approached cautiously, understanding that he was witnessing a pivotal, soul-defining moment in the man's life. Arthur reached out hesitantly, gently touching the fox, who surprisingly didn't flinch at the elder man's approach. A silent understanding passed between both men, a powerful, unspoken acknowledgement of humanity's shared vulnerability, their shared need for forgiveness and redemption. For a long moment, neither man spoke, their silence a powerful conversation of empathy, forgiveness, and quiet healing. Oliver saw clearly the complex tapestry of human emotions at play, the threads of pain and redemption intertwined in ways he had never imagined possible. Arthur finally withdrew his hand, eyes lowered, humbled by the quiet forgiveness Oliver offered without uttering a word. Arthur turned slowly, stepping back into the shadows of the evening, leaving Oliver standing alone once again, the fox gently trembling against his chest. Oliver looked thoughtfully toward the fading horizon, feeling a quiet peace settle gently within him. The cruelty and harshness he had endured were now balanced by this delicate and powerful moment of justice, a resolution whispered not in triumph, but in quiet humility. He carried the fox carefully in his arms, knowing deeply that this moment symbolized something far greater, an affirmation of the profound interconnectedness between all creatures, human and animal alike, bound by a shared capacity for pain, redemption, and compassion. Yet even as he felt this peace settle warmly within him, Oliver sensed an undercurrent of lingering tension, an unresolved thread quietly tugging at his consciousness. Although Arthur's transformation had begun, Oliver couldn't help but wonder if this powerful revelation would fully cleanse the bitterness that still lingered deep within the sergeant's heart. Would Arthur truly change, or would his awakening merely be a brief moment of clarity, swiftly fading with the dawn? Holding the fox gently, Oliver sensed this uncertain future, a powerful hint that the wheels of karma had only just begun to turn, and that Arthur's newfound humility might yet be tested in ways neither of them could foresee. Oliver felt a gentle chill ripple down his spine, an instinctive warning of deeper challenges yet to come, mysteries that would inevitably demand answers, actions, and perhaps even sacrifices greater than those he had already endured. Under the fading twilight, Oliver moved thoughtfully through the quiet gardens, wondering deeply about the hidden trials that awaited them both, understanding profoundly that karma's work was never truly finished, that redemption was often the prelude, not the conclusion, to even deeper revelations. And as the night fully descended, cloaking Windsor Castle in gentle darkness, Oliver sensed, with profound certainty, that the truest tests of his heart, and perhaps Arthur's, still lay silently waiting, patiently hidden within the uncertain embrace of tomorrow's dawn. In the gentle fading light that softened the rich contours of Windsor's ancient stone walls, Arthur Colburn stood motionless at the edge of the gardens, feeling an ache deep within his chest, a pang of unfamiliar regret that resonated throughout every fiber of his aging frame. The once uncompromising sergeant, whose voice had instilled apprehension in countless young guards, now seemed diminished, overshadowed by a haunting realization of his own cruelty. His face, weathered and stern from decades of duty, wore an expression of profound remorse, a depth of sorrow that weighed heavily upon his conscience. Standing beneath the pale glow of a flickering lantern, Arthur gazed pensively toward the soft outline of Oliver Bennet in the distance, whose tenderness towards a frightened, injured fox had shattered Arthur's rigid convictions and forced him to confront the stark reflection of his own hardened heart. Arthur had watched silently, unseen by Oliver, as the younger guard gently cradled the trembling animal, speaking to it with such tenderness, such selfless compassion, that Arthur felt as though he were witnessing a sacred ritual of humanity itself. Every gentle stroke Oliver offered the injured creature painfully echoed the merciless moments when Arthur had denied such compassion, moments when his ruthless sense of authority had trampled dreams, silenced hope, and crushed spirits far more delicate than even the wounded fox before him. Memories surged forward with ruthless clarity, unforgiving visions of all those he had wronged, most vividly the vulnerable young Emily Hartfield, whose only sin had been daring to dream beyond the confines imposed upon her by a cold-hearted world. A tremor ran through Arthur's broad shoulders, an involuntary reaction to the sudden, overwhelming sense of karmic justice. The universe had finally caught up with him, stripping away his armor of pride and arrogance, forcing him to witness, unshielded, the consequences of his actions. Arthur's eyes glistened painfully, the first tears he'd allowed himself in decades slipping silently down his lined face, carrying with them all the regret, guilt, and profound sorrow that had silently accumulated within his soul. In the quiet solitude of the evening gardens, Arthur understood the poetic justice in his pain. It was precisely what he had so coldly inflicted upon others, now revisited upon himself. Through misted vision, Arthur watched Oliver tenderly whisper comfort to the frightened animal. The vulnerability he saw, the quiet bravery in Oliver's action, struck deeply at Arthur's core, prompting him to recall vividly the countless moments when he had mocked and belittled that very vulnerability. The images haunted him, memories of callously dismissing the tears of young recruits, ridiculing their gentle hearts and empathetic gestures as weakness. Bitter regret tightened its grip around his chest, almost suffocating him with the painful recognition of his own blind cruelty. Oliver's tenderness felt like a direct rebuke from fate, highlighting Arthur's stark absence of empathy, a cruel mirror forcing him to finally confront the harshest truth of all, the undeniable emptiness of his pride. Feeling compelled by a force stronger than pride, Arthur moved slowly from his hiding place, stepping cautiously into the open, his heavy boots crunching softly upon the graveled pathway. Oliver's gaze rose swiftly at the unexpected approach, a mix of wariness and curiosity reflected within his eyes. Arthur hesitated, words failing him as he stood in the gentle twilight, unable initially to voice the storm raging silently within his soul. Finally, clearing his throat gently, he managed a quiet, broken whisper. "Oliver, I owe you something, an apology long overdue." Oliver, still protectively holding the young fox, regarded Arthur with measured caution, curiosity blending with an instinctive compassion that Arthur found both reassuring and humbling. He steadied himself, forcing out words that felt foreign yet necessary. "I was wrong, Oliver, so terribly wrong about you. And wrong about Emily, too." Arthur's voice broke slightly, betraying his struggle. "My cruelty has haunted me every night, a constant reminder of all I failed to see clearly. I saw weakness in your compassion. I mocked your kindness as naivete. Yet now I understand that your heart held a courage and strength far beyond anything I've ever demonstrated." A deep silence settled between the two men, filled only by the soft breathing of the fox and the distant whispers of the evening breeze. Oliver's expression softened slightly, sensing the truth in Arthur's words. Arthur took a step closer, his tone now laden with emotion. "Years ago, Oliver, before duty hardened my heart, I too had dreams and passions. But I buried them beneath duty and conformity, ridiculing others who dared follow their hearts. Emily, you, even this tiny animal you now protect, all are brave in ways I have never been." He paused, his voice choked with regret. "And that is my karma, Oliver, to finally understand my failings when it might be too late to correct them. I see now the injustice I inflicted on you and Emily, and perhaps worst of all, the injustice I inflicted upon myself by shutting out compassion in favor of pride. I can only hope that my heart is not so hardened that it cannot still learn, even at this late stage, to embrace humility, kindness, and genuine redemption." Oliver's expression softened, seeing Arthur's sincere remorse. The gentle compassion he had once extended only to Emily and the fox now reached cautiously toward Arthur himself. The older man's confession had not only been unexpected, it had profoundly altered the delicate balance of their relationship, and Oliver felt a surge of empathy, understanding that perhaps, even for a man like Arthur Colburn, redemption was never entirely beyond reach. Arthur extended his hand slowly, hesitantly, towards Oliver, a gesture of reconciliation as powerful as it was symbolic. Oliver accepted it gently, feeling in the older man's trembling grip the vulnerability of someone finally confronting his humanity. "It's not too late, Arthur," Oliver whispered softly, reassurance and forgiveness woven deeply into his words. "Compassion can always be rediscovered if only you allow it." Arthur nodded silently, gratitude shimmering openly in his eyes, the burden on his heart visibly eased by Oliver's quiet forgiveness. And at that precise moment, a small noise drew both men's attention back to the fox, now calmer in Oliver's embrace. Its wide, trusting eyes met Arthur's gaze, and in that single glance, Arthur saw something extraordinary reflected, a purity of spirit, an innocence he had so carelessly disregarded in his ruthless past. It seemed a final confirmation from the universe itself. This tiny creature, so innocent yet so resilient, was the ultimate embodiment of karmic justice, teaching lessons far beyond the reach of mere words. Oliver carefully placed the fox gently onto a soft patch of grass, where it watched both men with calm, trusting eyes. Arthur knelt beside Oliver, uncharacteristically humbled, extending his hand cautiously toward the fox. This time, the small animal allowed the touch, responding instinctively to Arthur's genuine remorse, as if nature itself understood the sincerity of the sergeant's transformation. Together, beneath the twilight's gentle embrace, Oliver and Arthur quietly forged a silent pact born from humility, empathy, and the profound recognition of karmic balance. Yet, despite this gentle resolution, Oliver felt a subtle intuition whisper softly through him. The journey toward true redemption, for Arthur, for himself, perhaps even for Emily, had only just begun. The serenity of this evening carried the unmistakable sense of something unfinished, an elusive thread hidden beneath the quiet surface of reconciliation, waiting patiently to reveal itself. As both men slowly rose, leaving the gardens and stepping once again into the deepening night, Oliver felt an instinctive anticipation, a quiet, powerful awareness that karma, justice, and destiny would once again intertwine in ways none could yet predict. Something awaited, hidden in the gentle shadows of tomorrow, something mysterious and powerful enough to challenge even the bravest hearts. And as the castle's silhouette darkened softly against the velvet sky, Oliver sensed with absolute certainty that fate had not finished with them yet. The soft glow of dusk gently draped itself over the countryside outside Windsor, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, as Arthur Colburn slowly wandered along a narrow, winding path that led away from the castle. This was not the route Arthur typically chose, and in truth, he hardly knew why he had ventured so far from the familiar walls that had for decades defined the boundaries of his disciplined life. Yet something deeper, a subtle instinct buried beneath layers of habit and tradition, urged him forward, pressing him towards some unknown, yet compelling destination. He moved slowly, deliberately, each step feeling like a subtle confrontation with his past, a past filled with rigid authority, prideful dominance, and a stern dismissal of compassion. As he continued on, Arthur gradually became aware of the sounds around him. The soft murmuring of evening birds settling down to rest, the rustle of leaves gently stirred by the twilight breeze, and the distant hum of insects signaling the peaceful surrender of daylight to darkness. Yet, amid this peaceful symphony, a sudden, faint whimper captured his attention. Arthur halted immediately, his body tensing instinctively. He strained his ears, listening carefully, a chill running through him as he searched the shadows, his heart oddly quickening at the sound of vulnerability, a sound he had once trained himself to ignore, but could no longer deny. Moving carefully, Arthur followed the faint whimpering noise through a thicket of brambles, feeling thorns catch at his trousers and tug insistently at his sleeves, almost as if nature itself resisted him, testing his resolve, forcing him to prove the sincerity of this newfound compassion. With each small tear to his clothing, Arthur felt the harshness of his previous actions piercing him metaphorically, each prickly thorn a tiny reminder of every injustice he had inflicted upon Oliver Bennet, upon Emily Hartfield, and even upon himself. Every step forward was now a quiet plea for redemption, a desperate attempt to soothe the bitter ache of regret that had settled permanently within him. At last, the tangled branches parted, revealing a small clearing bathed in the soft, dying embers of sunset. Arthur's breath caught painfully in his throat as he saw the source of the sound, a trembling young deer, its slender frame trapped cruelly by a snare, hidden carelessly among the leaves by some heartless poacher. The animal was helpless, its dark, gentle eyes wide with terror, its slender legs twisted painfully beneath it. Arthur felt a sharp pang deep within his chest, a powerful surge of guilt and remorse rising like a tidal wave as he recognized his own past cruelty mirrored tragically before him. Here, nature was forcing him to witness vividly and viscerally the pain and helplessness he had once so coldly ignored in others. Slowly and deliberately, Arthur approached the terrified animal, speaking in hushed tones of reassurance, though the fox regarded him warily, its frightened eyes wide with fear. Arthur's voice softened instinctively, trembling slightly with genuine sincerity. "It's all right now, little one. You're not alone. I won't harm you," he whispered, barely recognizing his own voice, a voice now softened by compassion and vulnerability, qualities he once despised as weaknesses. Carefully kneeling beside the animal, Arthur reached forward cautiously, mindful of not causing further pain. With surprising gentleness, he examined the fox's injured paw, his fingers trembling slightly as the fox winced but bravely endured his touch, its gaze fixed steadily upon him, filled not with fear, but trust. As Arthur worked quietly, binding the delicate wound with care, memories rushed unbidden to his mind. He vividly recalled a day many years before when a young recruit had come to him pleading desperately to help a stray dog he had found injured outside the barracks. Arthur had sharply dismissed the request, ridiculing the young man's empathy as naive and weak, ordering him to abandon the animal to its fate. The memory now stung him fiercely, his heart aching deeply with regret as he realized the cruelty he had inflicted not only upon the helpless animal, but also upon the young man whose compassionate spirit he had crushed. That young recruit had been Oliver Bennet, the very man whose compassion and courage had now shamed Arthur into recognizing his own moral blindness. Arthur blinked away tears, feeling profoundly humbled by this powerful revelation, knowing that karma had now brought him full circle, demanding he face the consequences of his previous callousness. Gently lifting the fox into his arms, Arthur felt the animal's heart beating trustingly against his own, the steady rhythm of innocence relying completely upon him for safety, a stark reversal of roles that deeply unsettled him. This helpless creature had unknowingly become the embodiment of all those he had wronged, all the vulnerable souls he had harshly rejected. As Arthur rose to his feet, cradling the fox protectively, he realized painfully yet profoundly that life had entrusted him with this moment, this opportunity to rewrite his own narrative, a narrative once stained with cold indifference. Arthur turned slowly toward Windsor Castle, his footsteps heavy with the weight of newfound responsibility. As he carried the fox back along the shadowed path, he reflected deeply on how different this quiet act of compassion felt compared to the harsh commands and cold dismissals that had long defined him. He wondered if the cruelty he had inflicted upon others was ever truly justified, or if he had simply masked his own vulnerability behind a wall of rigid authority. The irony did not escape him. Arthur, the man who had prided himself on emotional detachment, was now deeply moved by the fragile animal nestled softly in his embrace, teaching him quietly the very lesson he had cruelly withheld from others. Arriving finally at the gates, Arthur hesitated, his eyes fixed uncertainly upon the distant silhouette of Oliver Bennet, who stood quietly in the fading twilight, seemingly lost in thought. Arthur paused, filled suddenly with self-doubt, fear that Oliver might reject this unexpected gesture of compassion, suspicious of its sincerity. Arthur steadied himself, determined to confront his past mistakes openly, stepping forward into Oliver's line of sight. The younger man looked up, startled momentarily by Arthur's sudden appearance, but then his expression softened into quiet understanding as he noticed the fox resting trustingly in Arthur's arms. No words were spoken as their gazes locked, but a profound understanding passed silently between the two men, one who had always embraced compassion, and the other who had finally, painfully, learned its true value. Arthur slowly placed the injured fox gently into Oliver's waiting hands, symbolically entrusting him not only with the animal, but also with the fragile hope of his own redemption. Oliver accepted the small creature with gentle care, sensing instinctively the sincerity behind Arthur's gesture, quietly acknowledging the man's courageous choice to change. As Arthur turned quietly to leave, feeling humbled yet strangely at peace, he noticed a dark figure silently observing from a distant corner of the gardens. The shadowy presence, though indistinct, seemed somehow familiar, stirring a troubling sense of unease within Arthur's heart. His newfound calm was suddenly tinged with a quiet apprehension, a subtle but unmistakable warning that his journey toward redemption was not yet complete, that karma's lessons might still hold unseen trials to test him even further. Arthur took a deep breath, steadying himself against the inexplicable uncertainty now gathering silently around him. As he walked quietly into the deepening darkness, the faint rustling of the trees around him whispered ominously, as though hinting at secrets still untold, injustices yet unresolved, and tests of compassion far more profound than those he had just endured. Arthur knew, deep within, that his moment of clarity tonight was merely the beginning. Karma's delicate scales were still balancing, and the truest challenges were yet to be revealed. The sun had dipped well below the horizon, leaving Windsor Castle bathed in the serene, melancholic glow of twilight. Shadows lengthened gently across the courtyard, the ancient stones absorbing the last amber hues of day as a quiet hush descended over the grand gardens. Margaret Hartfield walked slowly, each step weighted with quiet contemplation, her face gently illuminated by the soft twilight, etched deeply by the emotional journey she had quietly endured. She paused beneath the aged branches of a majestic oak tree, its sprawling limbs outstretched like protective arms, whispering the secrets of centuries past to the breeze. Margaret felt a calm reverence in its presence, the gentle majesty of nature reminding her vividly of all the life lessons that had unfolded over recent weeks, lessons written not in triumph, but in quiet humility and strength. For Margaret, these gardens had always been a place of reflection, a sanctuary of peace where life's harsh realities felt momentarily distant, yet tonight something deeper stirred within her, an unsettling awareness that karma, that ancient and mysterious force, had quietly guided her journey and now stood poised, ready to deliver a justice that she had almost given up hope of witnessing. Her gaze lingered on a distant figure moving slowly toward her through the gathering shadows, a familiar silhouette emerging gradually from the darkness, each step heavy with profound hesitation. Margaret felt her pulse quicken, her breathing tightening with apprehension and curiosity as the figure grew clearer, revealing itself unmistakably as Henry Ellsworth, the man whose cruelty had once caused her unspeakable anguish. Years before, long before Emily's struggles, Margaret had endured a painful betrayal at Henry's hands, a man she once trusted implicitly, whose callous indifference had left scars that never fully healed. Henry, whose arrogant charm once concealed a heart devoid of compassion, had abandoned Margaret at her most vulnerable moment, leaving her broken, alone, and grappling with a profound injustice that she had silently carried ever since. Margaret felt a chill ripple gently through her spine, the past now colliding forcefully with her present, forcing her to confront the very face she had spent years desperately attempting to erase from memory. Henry approached slowly, his footsteps hesitant, his demeanor humbled, an uncharacteristic vulnerability etched into his aging features. Margaret watched silently, her heart constricting painfully, bitterness mixing with curiosity as to why fate had chosen this particular moment to resurrect old wounds. Her pulse quickened when she realized he was carefully holding something small and delicate in his arms. Her curiosity deepened into quiet astonishment when Henry finally stood before her, revealing what he held, a tiny, abandoned puppy, trembling, frail, helpless, and clearly in need of care. For a moment, no words passed between them, the silence heavy with decades of unspoken pain and resentment. Margaret's heart pounded violently against her ribs, memories resurfacing bitterly, Henry's cruel abandonment mirrored in the innocent, frightened eyes of the tiny animal he now cradled. Yet, as Margaret watched the gentle, careful way Henry handled the helpless puppy, something unexpectedly powerful began to shift within her. The stark contradiction between his current gentleness and the harshness she remembered caused confusion to swirl intensely inside her. Karma, it seemed, had finally chosen its perfect moment, confronting Henry with the vulnerability he had once so heartlessly ignored, forcing him to face the echoes of his own past cruelty. Henry halted a few paces away, visibly struggling for words, finally breaking the painful silence with a voice thickened by emotion. "Margaret, there are words I've owed you for years. I've carried the guilt, the shame of how cruelly I treated you, the way I abandoned you when you needed me most. And tonight, I see clearly what I once refused to acknowledge." His voice trembled, his grip tightening slightly around the fragile animal, as though drawing strength from the trust and innocence held within its small body. "I left you alone, vulnerable, abandoned to face life's cruelty without a second thought. Yet life has its own strange sense of justice, Margaret, one I never imagined I would so vividly understand. Today, as I found this injured animal helplessly trapped and abandoned, I finally saw myself clearly, the selfish man who walked away from responsibility, the man who chose convenience over compassion." Margaret felt her throat tighten painfully, emotions she had carefully buried resurfacing fiercely at his unexpected confession. She saw clearly the sincerity in Henry's eyes, eyes that once held only arrogant disdain, now clouded with genuine remorse, and she recognized instantly the profound karmic justice in this powerful, poetic reversal. Margaret took a steadying breath, feeling her chest rise and fall unevenly, uncertain whether she could trust Henry's sudden change of heart. Yet in the animal's quiet, trusting gaze, Margaret glimpsed an undeniable truth. Karma had finally stripped away Henry's carefully constructed facade, forcing him to confront, without escape, the coldness of his past actions. She moved slowly closer, her gaze cautiously fixed upon Henry, her voice trembling softly. "Do you truly understand, Henry, the depth of what you did, the pain you caused? Do you realize the scars you've left on hearts that once trusted you implicitly?" Henry's head lowered further, his shame openly visible as tears formed slowly in his tired eyes. "I do, Margaret. Every moment I ignored your pain, every time I mocked your gentleness. Today I've felt it all, here in my own heart, as if the universe itself demanded I experience your suffering firsthand." Margaret hesitated, the depth of sincerity in Henry's voice striking a powerful chord within her. Without realizing it, her own heart softened slowly, the bitterness giving way gently to an unexpected empathy. She reached out carefully, her trembling fingers gently brushing against the puppy's delicate fur, feeling its rapid heartbeat, its vulnerable innocence resonating powerfully within her own chest. In that fragile connection, Margaret felt an unmistakable surge of compassion, a compassion she thought had long since vanished beneath layers of bitterness. Yet even as this powerful moment of forgiveness unfolded, Margaret sensed a shadowy presence at the edge of her consciousness, a subtle whisper of unease, as though Karma's journey toward justice was still incomplete. The emotional bond formed through the innocent animal seemed to hint at a deeper mystery, a puzzle yet unsolved, a lesson yet unlearned. Margaret felt the unsettling chill of uncertainty ripple down her spine, intuition warning her gently that Henry's path toward redemption, much like her own, was only just beginning. Turning slowly, Henry placed the tiny creature into Margaret's gentle hands, a symbolic act of trust and surrender. As Margaret held the vulnerable animal, she felt deeply the intricate interconnectedness between all living beings, the silent bonds of compassion, trust, and redemption that bound humans and animals alike. Yet still, beneath this gentle reconciliation, Margaret's heart whispered softly a lingering question. Was Henry truly redeemed, or was this humility merely a fragile moment of clarity destined to fade with tomorrow's dawn? As twilight deepened into night, Margaret glanced toward the distant castle walls, now shadowed and mysterious beneath the emerging starlight, feeling instinctively that the story unfolding tonight was merely one piece of a much larger puzzle. She knew that this quiet evening, rich in karma and redemption, was not the end of their journey but a subtle, compelling invitation toward deeper truths yet to be uncovered. Margaret's heart quickened with quiet anticipation. She understood that this brief moment of reconciliation was merely karma's gentle overture, the quiet before the storm of revelations and challenges yet unseen. With the injured animal now safely nestled in her embrace, Margaret turned slowly back toward the castle, a delicate sense of expectation rising within her soul. The twilight whispered gently around her, echoing softly with promises of secrets still hidden, justice still awaiting fulfillment, and karma's mysterious workings yet to fully unfold. She felt certain, deep in her heart, that what lay ahead would test their spirits profoundly, uncovering truths even more powerful, and perhaps more painful, than anything experienced thus far. The fading twilight deepened into night, blanketing the town of Windsor in a gentle cloak of darkness, pierced occasionally by the faint, silver glow of distant stars peeking timidly through drifting clouds. A cold breeze brushed across Oliver Bennet's tired face as he stood alone on the outskirts of the old stone bridge overlooking the peaceful, slow-moving Thames. The day's festivities, rich in both triumph and revelation, now echoed distantly behind him, muted by the quiet serenity of nightfall. Yet Oliver felt no relief in the evening's stillness. Instead, his heart remained restless, burdened by the nagging certainty that karma's delicate balance had yet to reveal all of its intricate, final truths. Gazing thoughtfully at the gentle ripples in the river's glassy surface, Oliver recalled vividly the transformative journey that had brought him to this point, the deep emotional connections formed with Emily, the innocent animal he had rescued, and even Arthur Colburn's humbled redemption. Each of these moments had etched deeply into Oliver's heart, reshaping his understanding of compassion and justice. Yet tonight, an uneasy feeling gnawed persistently within him, an unsettling intuition whispering insistently that there remained one final act, one final moment of karmic balance still waiting patiently in the wings of fate. As Oliver stood silently lost in thought, the sudden muffled rustling from the riverside bushes startled him from contemplation. He turned sharply toward the sound, his pulse quickening in instinctive caution. Emerging slowly from the shadowed foliage was a solitary figure, frail and uncertain, shuffling quietly along the riverbank. Oliver squinted cautiously into the encroaching darkness, his heart quickening as the figure finally stepped forward into the faint illumination cast by a nearby lamppost. His eyes widened in startled disbelief as he recognized the familiar face of Jasper Eldridge, the man who long ago had inflicted unimaginable cruelty upon Oliver's family, leaving scars upon his childhood that never fully healed. Oliver felt his fists involuntarily tighten, years of repressed anguish and bitterness suddenly surging powerfully to the surface. Jasper had once wielded his influence recklessly, his wealth and power shielding him from accountability. The suffering Jasper inflicted had haunted Oliver for decades, buried deep within his consciousness, but never truly forgotten. Yet here, standing now before him beneath the quiet gaze of the stars, Jasper appeared drastically altered, his once arrogant features now gaunt, his once proud stance now slumped beneath the weight of exhaustion and defeat. His worn, disheveled appearance starkly mirrored the vulnerability of the creatures Oliver had so fiercely protected, creatures whose helplessness Jasper had always scorned. Oliver's pulse quickened, his emotions surging uncontrollably between anger and compassion, bitterness and pity. Jasper hesitated, visibly struggling for words, his pride painfully swallowed as he forced himself to speak, his voice barely audible. "Oliver, I never expected to see you again. I've wandered for years, haunted by what I've done, haunted by how my cruelty destroyed so much innocence." Jasper's voice broke, his words heavy with a sincerity Oliver had never imagined possible from this man. "I've suffered deeply, Oliver. Karma has taught me lessons harsher than I could ever have anticipated." Oliver remained silent, watching cautiously, his heart a chaotic swirl of conflicting emotions. Yet as he listened, an inexplicable curiosity awakened within him, compelling him to understand this unexpected encounter fully. Jasper stepped closer, trembling with vulnerability, his hands shaking slightly as he continued, "I lost everything, Oliver, my family, my wealth, even my pride. But the hardest loss was the innocence I robbed from you, and the pain I inflicted upon so many defenseless creatures. I've lived every day since haunted by their cries, haunted by my cruelty. Fate punished me slowly, relentlessly reminding me of each act of cruelty. Tonight, finding you here feels like karma finally delivering its final judgment." Oliver's heart tightened painfully in his chest as Jasper spoke. The profound sincerity, the stark revelation of Jasper's suffering resonated deeply within Oliver, stirring a powerful mix of empathy and bitterness. He knew clearly that this moment represented karma's ultimate challenge, demanding he confront not only Jasper's cruelty, but also his own capacity for forgiveness. The temptation to walk away, to leave Jasper trapped within the painful cycle of his own making, was overwhelming. Yet Oliver remembered vividly Emily's compassion toward those who had wronged her, remembered clearly the fox's innocent trust in Arthur's hesitant hands, and he knew he could not simply abandon Jasper to suffer endlessly beneath karma's cold gaze. With a deep breath, Oliver moved slowly toward Jasper, extending a cautious, compassionate hand, an offering of forgiveness he was not certain he could truly feel, but knew he must at least attempt. Jasper watched anxiously, barely daring to hope, his entire being radiating desperation for redemption. Oliver finally spoke, his voice steady yet filled with quiet gravity. "Your cruelty once destroyed my faith in humanity, Jasper. I suffered deeply, wounds that time could never fully heal. Yet if life has taught me anything, it's that no heart is beyond redemption. True justice lies not in endless punishment, but in the courage to forgive, even those who least deserve it." Jasper's eyes filled openly with tears, the genuine remorse reflected within them unmistakable. He fell slowly to his knees, overwhelmed by emotion, his shoulders shaking silently beneath the weight of his guilt. Oliver stood quietly, heart torn between lingering resentment and deepening compassion, realizing profoundly that forgiveness was never truly about absolving the other. It was about freeing oneself from the chains of bitterness and pain. In that silent revelation, Oliver gently extended his hand, symbolically bridging the abyss of past cruelty that separated them. Jasper grasped it hesitantly, his fragile grip filled with gratitude and humility, the moment powerful and poignant, a vivid embodiment of karmic justice finally fulfilled. Yet just as Oliver felt peace beginning to settle softly within him, a sudden rustling noise broke sharply through the night's tranquility, drawing his attention toward the dense foliage nearby. Oliver tensed instinctively, peering anxiously into the shadows. From the undergrowth emerged a young, injured dog, thin, bedraggled, and trembling, its gentle eyes wide with pain and fear. Oliver instantly recognized the karmic symbolism, a poignant reflection of Jasper's past cruelty now vividly mirrored in this innocent creature's suffering. Without hesitation, Oliver moved toward the frightened animal, kneeling carefully and extending a hand filled with gentle reassurance. Jasper watched silently, tears openly streaming down his weathered face, witnessing once again the compassionate heart he had once cruelly mocked now extending kindness even toward those he himself had abandoned. As Oliver gently comforted the dog, Jasper felt a powerful wave of understanding, an overwhelming recognition of karma's undeniable fairness, how life inevitably returned kindness and cruelty alike, multiplied by the sincerity or malice with which they were given. Arthur Colburn and Margaret Hartfield appeared quietly nearby, drawn unknowingly by the intensity of the unfolding scene. Arthur, whose journey of redemption had already profoundly altered him, watched Oliver in reverent silence, while Margaret felt her heart swelling with both pride and profound emotion at witnessing such an act of unconditional compassion. The two older souls watched in quiet reverence as Oliver turned again toward Jasper, his voice softly carrying profound depth. This animal, Jasper, like every creature you've harmed, depends now upon the kindness you once refused to offer. Your redemption depends not on my forgiveness alone, but on your willingness to change, to protect the innocence you once destroyed. Jasper nodded silently, rising slowly to his feet, humbled yet determined. His eyes filled with quiet resolve, understanding that karma's true justice required not only remorse, but also genuine, transformative action. As Oliver placed the injured animal carefully into Jasper's trembling hands, the older man accepted the creature with profound humility and care, understanding deeply the immense responsibility now entrusted to him by karma itself. Yet, as Oliver watched Jasper move away carefully, holding the fragile dog, a strange intuition whispered quietly within him. Although tonight felt deeply restorative, Oliver sensed that karma's balance was never easily completed, its lessons ever shifting, mysterious and unpredictable. He knew instinctively that even now, hidden truths waited patiently beyond tonight's fragile peace, silent challenges yet unrevealed, destined to test them all once more. Oliver's heart quickened softly, a quiet anticipation surging through him, knowing profoundly that this night's powerful revelations were merely the prelude to an even deeper karmic journey yet to unfold. The ancient grounds surrounding Windsor Castle were bathed in a hushed glow beneath the pale silver of a waning moon, casting long, whispering shadows across pathways that had felt centuries of history beneath countless footsteps. It was into this profound stillness that Margaret Hartfield slowly emerged, her steps cautious yet determined, each deliberate movement heavy with silent contemplation. Her mind was a tapestry of reflection woven with strands of unresolved memories, bittersweet regrets, and cautious hope. She breathed deeply the cool night air, the scent of lilacs and damp earth blending delicately, evoking memories she had buried deep within her heart, reminding her that tonight, the quiet beauty of this moment was merely the threshold to something profoundly significant, a deeper truth she had yet to fully grasp. Margaret moved deliberately down the winding gravel path, her heartbeat steadily accelerating with an anxious rhythm she could not fully explain. The gardens were familiar to her, yet tonight every rustle in the foliage, every flickering shadow beneath the distant trees felt charged with a peculiar tension. Her chest tightened gently with an inexplicable sense of unease, an intuition that whispered softly, insisting that fate had deliberately guided her here, placing her on a collision course with karma, prepared to reveal truths she'd long avoided confronting. As she rounded a gentle bend near the old garden fountain, a soft whimpering drew Margaret's attention sharply. She paused, her breath catching in her chest as her eyes searched anxiously through the shadows, drawn by the unmistakable, heart-rending sound of innocent suffering. Margaret felt a shiver ripple softly down her spine, as if fate itself were guiding her toward this moment, nudging her forward into a confrontation with a deeply buried guilt she had long chosen to ignore. The sound intensified her pulse, pulling at her heartstrings in a manner both troubling and profoundly familiar, compelling her to uncover the source of such fragile vulnerability. Carefully approaching the fountain, Margaret discovered an injured animal, a young greyhound emaciated and trembling, cowering in desperate fear against the weathered stone basin. The creature's large brown eyes gazed pleadingly upwards, clouded with pain and mistrust, reflecting an existence marred by neglect and suffering. Margaret felt an ache rise fiercely within her heart, a bitter sadness entwined with a fierce surge of empathy that shook her deeply, resonating with memories she desperately buried long ago, memories of her own helplessness, her own vulnerability, and the cold cruelty of those who had once heartlessly dismissed her suffering. Kneeling slowly, Margaret extended her hand cautiously, her voice soft and tender, as she whispered soothingly to the frightened animal. "There now, love, you're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you again." The greyhound recoiled at first, visibly uncertain, yet Margaret persisted, allowing patience and compassion to gently bridge the painful distance between them. As the dog finally surrendered, leaning tentatively into her touch, Margaret felt tears burning her eyes, tears not merely for the animal's plight, but for the injustices she herself had silently endured. At this powerful moment, Margaret felt a profound kinship, recognizing her own pain reflected within the delicate creature trembling before her. Her thoughts drifted unexpectedly to Frederick Barrow, the man whose cruelty had shattered her youthful trust long before Emily was even born. Frederick had cruelly discarded Margaret's vulnerability, abandoning her without remorse or apology, leaving emotional scars that still ached faintly beneath her skin. Margaret had long carried the bitter weight of injustice, quietly nursing wounds she never thought would heal. Yet here, beneath the pale moonlight, faced with another creature's suffering, she understood deeply the symbolic message the universe had gently placed before her. The suffering animal was Karma's quiet messenger, silently illustrating the inescapable justice that Frederick himself had unknowingly summoned upon himself through years of cruelty. As if summoned by Margaret's very thoughts, a soft footstep echoed suddenly behind her, causing her heart to leap nervously. She turned sharply, eyes widening in shock as Frederick himself stepped hesitantly into view, his silhouette ghost-like beneath the moonlight, his once proud bearing now diminished into vulnerability. Frederick's face, once handsome and arrogant, was now marked deeply with remorse and sorrow, his features softened by the merciless hand of regret. His eyes met Margaret's, reflecting the sincerity of a man humbled profoundly by Karma's ruthless hand. He noticed the greyhound trembling at Margaret's feet, and his expression immediately dissolved into raw anguish, recognizing instantly the symbolic justice standing between them. Frederick's voice trembled painfully, filled with genuine regret. "Margaret, life has taught me harshly what I refused to understand when I hurt you. Every heartless act I committed has returned to haunt me, each wound inflicted now reflected back in my own heart. Karma's justice is painfully clear tonight. I've suffered endlessly for the cruelty I inflicted upon you and upon so many innocent souls." He hesitated, eyes clouded with tears of remorse. "I never deserve your forgiveness, Margaret, but tonight I stand before you, begging simply for understanding, for the chance to prove my heart has finally changed." Margaret felt her chest tighten, her heart torn fiercely between the bitterness she had harbored for decades and the empathy stirred by Frederick's honest remorse. She glanced downward, gently stroking the greyhound's trembling fur, recognizing powerfully that Karma's justice was both deeply cruel and infinitely compassionate. Her voice was quiet but resolute, filled with dignity and vulnerability. "You showed me cruelty, Frederick, cruelty I never deserved. Yet tonight, through the innocent eyes of this creature, I see clearly how life ensures each of us learns, sooner or later, the lessons of compassion we've stubbornly ignored." Frederick lowered his gaze, visibly humbled by Margaret's quiet strength, his pride stripped away completely beneath her unwavering honesty. His voice broke softly as he spoke again. "Margaret, let me care for this animal. Let me demonstrate the sincerity of my remorse through actions, not empty words. Allow me, please, the chance to redeem myself, not only to you, but to the innocent souls I've hurt. Let me bear this responsibility as my penance." Margaret studied Frederick quietly, sensing a powerful sincerity she had never previously witnessed from him. Slowly, cautiously, she placed the trembling greyhound gently into Frederick's waiting arms, entrusting him symbolically not only with the animal's care, but with the fragile hope of genuine redemption. Frederick cradled the creature carefully, tenderness radiating from his every movement, and Margaret felt, with profound clarity, the transformative power of karma, the justice that finally balanced cruelty with compassion, arrogance with humility, pain with healing. Yet, even as Frederick turned to leave, holding the vulnerable animal close against his chest, Margaret sensed a subtle, lingering unease stirring within her heart. Tonight's emotional resolution felt undeniably powerful, yet she knew instinctively that karma's intricate tapestry still held threads unresolved, secrets still concealed within its mysterious weave. A gentle whisper of intuition tugged insistently at her consciousness, hinting quietly that the peaceful equilibrium achieved tonight was fragile, merely the brief calm before a deeper storm waiting patiently just beyond the shadows. She turned slowly toward the castle's silhouette, now etched dramatically against the starlit sky, knowing deeply that the peace she felt tonight was merely temporary, the serene interlude preceding another chapter, a chapter that promised to test hearts more profoundly, revealing truths even deeper and perhaps more painful. Margaret felt a quiet determination rise within her, understanding profoundly that true justice was rarely swift or easy, but always inevitably revealed itself fully in its own mysterious timing. As she walked thoughtfully back toward the ancient stone walls of Windsor, Margaret felt an unmistakable sense of anticipation, a powerful certainty that karma had yet to fully reveal its intricate design, that this peaceful moment was only a delicate pause before the next revelation, filled with profound lessons, awaited them all in the shadows of the unfolding future. Underneath a sky heavy with storm clouds that seemed to mourn the bitter injustices of days long past, Arthur Colburn slowly made his way along a lonely country lane on the outskirts of Windsor. It was a route he had walked countless times before, yet tonight, beneath the brooding heavens, each step felt profoundly different, as if he were traversing an entirely new path, one illuminated by the harsh but cleansing light of introspection. His once commanding posture, hardened by decades of strict discipline, now carried the subtle slump of humility, the proud uniform replaced by a simple coat, dampened by drizzle and heavy with the weight of unresolved remorse. Arthur's weathered features bore deep shadows, etched by years of stubborn pride now finally yielding to the quiet demands of karma's inexorable justice. Pausing briefly beside an old, gnarled willow that stood sentinel along the roadside, Arthur gazed silently into the deepening dusk. The tree's twisted branches hung low, whispering softly as they brushed gently against the grass below, almost like solemn spirits reminding him of every harsh word he'd uttered, every cruel dismissal he'd carelessly thrown upon those whose only crime had been compassion. Arthur closed his eyes momentarily, the memory of Emily Hartfield's quiet dignity, Oliver Bennett's steadfast courage, and his own cruel dismissals of their vulnerabilities flooding his heart with a deep, wrenching remorse. Tonight, karma had finally compelled him to face the very truths he had once so arrogantly denied. As Arthur stood quietly beneath the ancient willow, lost deeply in thought, the quiet sobbing of an animal suddenly pierced the evening silence, snapping him from his remorseful reflection. He turned sharply toward the haunting sound, his heart quickening anxiously as he peered through the dim twilight toward the shadowed hedgerow nearby. Cautiously moving forward, Arthur's breath caught painfully in his chest at the heartbreaking sight before him, a delicate young foal, its legs tangled cruelly in a length of barbed wire hidden carelessly by the roadside. The small horse was visibly frightened, its wide, trusting eyes filled with confusion and pain, a sight that tore fiercely at Arthur's newly awakened compassion. The irony struck him sharply, a cruel twist of karma, as vivid as it was undeniable. Arthur remembered clearly the days when he would have callously dismissed such suffering, labeling vulnerability as weakness. Yet tonight, witnessing the innocent animal's anguish, he felt a powerful surge of empathy, an emotion so overwhelming it threatened to break him. This fragile foal, innocent yet harshly wounded, mirrored perfectly every vulnerability he had once scorned. Each instance of pain he had inflicted upon others returned now with haunting, undeniable clarity. Arthur knelt carefully beside the frightened animal, his hands shaking with emotion as he spoke softly, reassuringly, in a voice he hardly recognized as his own. "It's all right, little one. I'm here. I'll not abandon you like I once abandoned so many others." The foal's eyes met his own, as if sensing intuitively the sincerity of his intentions, a fragile trust emerging cautiously amid the creature's fear. Arthur felt tears burning sharply behind his eyes, realizing profoundly that this vulnerable animal now depended entirely upon him, and through this realization came the full weight of karma's poetic justice. The very man who had mocked compassion was now entrusted by fate to prove its strength. As Arthur painstakingly worked to free the animal from its cruel bonds, memories surfaced vividly within him, moments when his prideful cruelty had inflicted needless suffering upon those who had trusted him implicitly. He remembered clearly how he had mocked Oliver's gentle heart, punished the younger man's tender gestures, his own harsh laughter echoing mercilessly back at him now with painful accuracy. Each memory stung fiercely, punctuated by the frightened whimpers of the foal now trapped before him. Karma, Arthur thought bitterly, was indeed meticulous, relentlessly demanding the reckoning of each injustice, every careless dismissal of another's pain. Arthur finally freed the animal's legs, gently removing the sharp wire from its delicate flesh, feeling a surge of profound relief as the foal shakily rose to its feet, its breathing slowing gradually from terrified gasps to gentle breaths of trust. As Arthur stroked its soft, trembling mane, a voice suddenly startled him from behind, causing him to spin nervously. Standing there in the gathering darkness was Robert Willoughby, the former commanding officer whose stern discipline and cruelty had once defined Arthur's own harsh attitudes. Arthur's heartbeat accelerated sharply, memories of his own suffering at Robert's hands surging powerfully within him. Robert had humiliated him countless times, dismissing Arthur's moments of compassion as weakness, shaping him into a man who echoed that cruelty upon others. Yet Robert, now frail and visibly aged, stood before Arthur, his eyes dimmed by sorrow, his once imposing figure bowed with a humility Arthur never imagined possible. "Arthur," Robert's voice trembled, thick with the weight of regret. "I've watched you tonight, the way you comforted this helpless creature, the very kindness I once scorned in you. My cruelty shaped you, Arthur, poisoned your heart as mine was poisoned before you. Tonight, karma has shown me vividly the pain I passed on to you, pain that you inflicted upon others because of my own blindness." Robert paused, his voice trembling with genuine regret. "Forgive me, Arthur, for teaching you cruelty instead of compassion." Arthur stood silently, emotions surging violently within him, bitterness, resentment, sorrow, and a burgeoning empathy he had never imagined he could feel toward this man. Finally, he spoke, voice gentle yet firm. "We are both responsible for the pain we've caused, Robert. The cruelty we shared can never be justified. Yet tonight, fate has given us both a chance to prove that even the hardest hearts can learn compassion again. Perhaps karma, in its strange wisdom, has finally granted us both a chance to find redemption." Robert nodded solemnly, visibly moved, acknowledging Arthur's quiet wisdom. Together, in a profound symbolic gesture, they carefully lifted the injured foal onto its feet, steadying it with gentle hands, their eyes briefly meeting in a powerful, silent understanding, an acknowledgement that true redemption was possible only when cruelty was confronted and sincerely reversed. Yet, as they stood quietly beneath the shadow of the willow, the foal now safe between them, Arthur felt a subtle shiver ripple through him, a quiet intuition whispering mysteriously within his heart. Despite this profound moment of karmic redemption, he sensed that the lessons fate had chosen to reveal tonight were only the beginning of something deeper, a mystery yet to unfold, truths still concealed, waiting quietly for their moment to emerge. As Arthur and Robert walked slowly together toward the distant lights of Windsor, the evening breeze whispered softly around them, carrying faint echoes of secrets yet untold, promises of justice not yet fully delivered, and trials still waiting patiently in the shadows. Arthur knew with quiet certainty that karma's final reckoning had yet to fully reveal itself, and that tonight, beneath this gentle moonlight, was merely the calm before a storm destined to test them all in ways none could yet imagine. In the gentle tranquility of the moonlit evening, Emily Hartfield sat quietly in her wheelchair beneath an ancient oak that stretched protective branches toward the heavens, its leafy silhouette etched tenderly against the velvet canvas of the starlit sky. Her eyes gazed thoughtfully into the distant darkness, searching for answers that the serene stillness of the gardens could not easily provide. Her fingers traced gently over the delicate petals of a solitary rose, its fragile beauty a bittersweet reminder of her own vulnerability, resilience, and the pain she'd silently endured through a lifetime overshadowed by judgment and prejudice. Yet tonight, even amidst this tender reflection, Emily sensed deeply that fate had yet another twist of karmic justice hidden in its sleeve, another layer to unravel before her journey would finally feel complete. A soft rustling among the shrubs nearby startled Emily from her thoughts, causing her heartbeat to quicken anxiously as her eyes darted swiftly towards the sound. Her pulse raced with an instinctive caution, sharpened by a lifetime of navigating a world that had not always shown her kindness. From the darkness, a familiar figure emerged slowly, hesitantly stepping forward into the pale glow of moonlight. Emily felt her chest tighten painfully as recognition struck her sharply, realizing with trembling disbelief that the woman standing uncertainly before her was Victoria Lindley, the very woman whose cruelty had once shattered Emily's delicate dreams, publicly ridiculing her aspirations with a cold indifference that still haunted her to this day. Emily's breath trembled slightly as a flood of memories surged fiercely within her, the sting of humiliation, the sharp ache of rejection, each harsh word from Victoria's lips leaving a scar upon her gentle heart. Victoria, whose beauty and poise had once concealed a heart hardened by privilege, now appeared fragile and broken, her usually proud posture diminished beneath an unmistakable burden of remorse. Emily studied her quietly, conflicting emotions swirling fiercely within her chest, uncertainty blending painfully with curiosity. Why had karma chosen this particular moment to confront Victoria, bringing her here tonight of all nights? Victoria halted a few steps away, her eyes lowered in shame, her once confident voice trembling noticeably as she spoke softly. "Emily, I've been searching for you. I've wandered through these gardens for hours, desperate to find you, to speak to you before this night ends. Please just listen." Emily hesitated cautiously, her emotions fiercely at war within her, but finally nodded silently, willing at least to hear Victoria's words. The older woman's eyes filled with tears, her voice thick with genuine regret. "I've carried guilt every day since I hurt you, Emily. My arrogance made me blind to the pain I caused, and fate, in its merciless way, has finally taught me the cruelty I once inflicted." Victoria stepped closer, her voice trembling with genuine sincerity as she continued. "Tonight, as I wandered these gardens, fate delivered to me the very suffering I inflicted upon you, Emily. I stumbled upon an injured animal, helpless, abandoned, and terrified. And in those innocent eyes staring back at me, I saw clearly the reflection of my own cruelty. I understood with devastating clarity the hurt I caused you, the pain I never allowed myself to acknowledge. Karma has made me feel every bit of anguish I caused, returning it multiplied, undeniable, and unrelenting." Emily listened silently, her heart fiercely moved by the sincerity in Victoria's trembling confession, deeply affected by the vivid symbolism karma had chosen to convey its profound justice. Her thoughts softened subtly, empathy rising powerfully within her, realizing deeply how suffering had finally humbled Victoria, bringing her to a profound moment of understanding. Emily's voice was gentle yet firm as she spoke quietly. "You dismissed my dreams, Victoria. You humiliated me for your own amusement, ignoring how deeply you wounded me. But tonight, seeing you here, so humbled and changed, I understand that life itself has shown you more clearly than my words ever could the true price of your cruelty." Victoria lowered her eyes in shame, clearly feeling the weight of Emily's words, yet Emily's compassionate tone encouraged her to look up again, hope cautiously flickering within her gaze. Victoria stepped closer, tears openly falling down her cheeks, her voice trembling with sincerity. "I'm sorry, Emily. Sorry for everything. Allow me to demonstrate to you the depth of my remorse, not just with words, but through action. Let me prove that even hearts once hardened by pride can change, and that karma's lessons are not ignored." Emily felt her throat tighten gently, heart quietly moved by the sincerity she witnessed in Victoria's pleading eyes. She sensed deeply that the remorse before her was genuine, yet her hesitation lingered softly, the wounds inflicted by Victoria's cruelty still vividly fresh in memory. Slowly, Emily reached out a gentle hand, and in a powerful symbolic act, allowed Victoria to place into her arms a small, trembling kitten, fragile and innocent, its wide eyes filled with the same trust and vulnerability Emily herself had always felt. Holding the animal tenderly, Emily's heart softened further, recognizing with profound clarity that forgiveness was not about erasing the past, but about courageously releasing the grip of bitterness and pain. Yet just as this tender moment of reconciliation unfolded beneath the watchful gaze of the moon, Emily sensed suddenly another presence, a shadow shifting quietly beneath the cover of darkness at the garden's edge. Her heart quickened, instincts sharpened by uncertainty and apprehension. From the shadows emerged a figure Emily had least expected, yet instinctively feared might arrive to disrupt this delicate peace. Vincent Ashby, the wealthy industrialist whose reckless cruelty toward animals had long outraged Emily's compassionate heart. Vincent, whose name had once been synonymous with indifference, whose arrogance had protected him from justice, now stepped into the moonlight, his arrogant presence deeply subdued, eyes haunted by pain he could no longer hide. Vincent halted a short distance away, clearly hesitant yet driven by something beyond himself, his gaze fixed humbly upon Emily. His voice was barely audible, filled with remorse and sincerity previously unimaginable. "Emily, I've watched quietly, unnoticed from afar as you bravely fought battles I once ignored, battles for kindness, compassion, for justice. I witnessed tonight's profound acts of redemption, and I finally understood the cruelty I've inflicted, not just upon innocent animals, but upon the innocence itself." Vincent paused, his voice choked with genuine regret. "Tonight, fate has finally revealed to me the full magnitude of my heartlessness. I come before you now, humbly asking for guidance toward a path I've only just begun to understand." Emily stood motionless, stunned into silence, her heart pounding fiercely. The karmic justice unfolding tonight had exceeded her deepest expectations. Vincent, whose cruelty had once seemed insurmountable, now stood genuinely humbled, pleading sincerely for guidance toward redemption. Her heart, previously burdened with mistrust, now surged powerfully with cautious hope, sensing that perhaps karma's complex tapestry had finally woven a path toward genuine change, even within a heart once so cruel. Yet even as Emily moved gently toward Vincent, offering quiet compassion and a willingness to forgive, an unexplainable chill ran sharply down her spine, warning her subtly that tonight's dramatic reconciliation was only the beginning of something deeper, more complicated, still unseen. Her gaze drifted momentarily to the kitten trembling in her arms, its innocent eyes wide with trust and vulnerability, a poignant reminder of the fragile peace tonight had brought and the quiet dangers still lurking, concealed patiently within fate's unseen hand. Emily breathed deeply, sensing with quiet certainty that karma's profound journey of justice was not yet fully resolved. The dramatic peace achieved tonight was temporary, fragile, a delicate equilibrium precariously balanced upon unresolved mysteries still awaiting their moment of revelation. Emily felt instinctively, profoundly certain that fate had not finished testing their hearts, that karma, in its quiet wisdom, was preparing even deeper lessons, hidden within shadows yet unexplored, waiting patiently to reveal truths that would challenge their courage and compassion far beyond anything yet experienced. In the solemn stillness of the grand Windsor Gardens, illuminated only by the gentle glow of lanterns, Arthur Colburn stood silently beside the quiet reflecting pool, his reflection trembling subtly on the moonlit water. The gentle rustle of autumn leaves seemed to echo softly around him, whispering secrets of sorrow and regret, reminders of pain he had both caused and endured. Tonight, beneath the watchful gaze of the stars, he felt a haunting sense of finality pressing heavily upon his chest, as though karma itself had orchestrated every moment of his journey precisely for this night. Arthur's proud shoulders, once rigid with unquestioned authority, now slumped humbly beneath the burden of a lifetime's worth of regret, weighed down by an unrelenting awareness of injustices long ignored, now finally demanding restitution. He turned slowly towards the ornate iron gates at the edge of the garden, where the shadows stirred restlessly as if anticipating his arrival. The soft crunch of gravel beneath his weary feet seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness, echoing quietly with each hesitant step he took toward the darkened silhouette awaiting him there. Arthur's pulse quickened instinctively, sensing that tonight would reveal the ultimate truth, a truth he had spent his entire life avoiding. Standing quietly in the shadows, illuminated faintly by the moonlight filtering gently through the clouds, stood James Winthrop, a figure from Arthur's distant past whose very name filled his heart with guilt, remorse, and an aching sense of injustice. Arthur halted slowly, breath frozen in his chest, memories cascading fiercely through him as he recognized the man whose life he had cruelly disrupted so many years ago. James had once been Arthur's subordinate, a young guard whose quiet gentleness and empathy Arthur had callously mocked, ruthlessly ridiculed before expelling him unjustly from the ranks. Arthur vividly remembered James' humiliation, the quiet dignity with which he'd endured the injustice inflicted upon him, a dignity Arthur had arrogantly disregarded at the time. Now James stood silently, his quiet presence a powerful mirror reflecting Arthur's own moral failures, the harshness he'd once projected upon others now reflected back with devastating clarity. James stepped cautiously forward, his eyes weary yet gentle, carrying the quiet strength of someone who had known suffering deeply but chosen compassion instead of bitterness. Arthur felt his chest tighten painfully, understanding with brutal clarity the true strength James had always possessed, strength Arthur himself had once mistaken for weakness. As James approached, Arthur saw the man was carefully cradling something small and fragile in his arms, a wounded dove, trembling softly, its feathers ruffled, its innocent eyes wide with confusion and fear. Arthur's heart ached sharply at the sight, recognizing immediately the symbolic justice karma was now forcing him to confront. The injured bird represented the innocence he had ruthlessly crushed beneath his proud heel, the vulnerability he had scorned and dismissed in countless others. James paused before Arthur, his gaze gentle but unwavering, a profound calm radiating from him despite the painful memories their meeting inevitably stirred. His voice was soft yet firm as he spoke. "Arthur, karma has brought us together again tonight, not to punish you, but perhaps finally to grant you understanding. In my hands lies the symbol of every heart you have harmed, every innocent spirit you've carelessly crushed beneath your pride. Tonight, life has placed the choice of redemption directly before you. Arthur swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making speech momentarily impossible. His eyes locked onto the trembling animal, a fragile newborn lamb, injured and helpless, whose gentle cries resonated powerfully within Arthur's very soul. He remembered vividly every cruel word he'd ever spoken, every moment he had turned away from those who had needed his compassion. James gently offered the injured animal toward him, the gesture deeply symbolic, compelling Arthur to confront directly the weight of responsibility karma had placed so vividly in his grasp. With shaking hands, Arthur took the lamb carefully, feeling its tiny heartbeat racing against his chest, each frightened tremble of the animal's fragile body painfully reminding him of the innocence he had betrayed, the gentleness he had brutally extinguished. Tears welled sharply in Arthur's eyes, the full weight of his past actions crashing painfully down upon him. His heart ached deeply with genuine remorse as he whispered softly, "James, I see clearly now, my cruelty, my pride, all the injustices I've committed. Tonight, karma has finally shown me the truth. My own vulnerability was hidden beneath a cruel facade. My cruelty was weakness, not strength." James nodded slowly, his gentle eyes filled with understanding and compassion, silently forgiving Arthur with grace that humbled him profoundly. As Arthur held the trembling lamb, a profound sense of peace began to gently flood his heart, washing away years of bitterness and regret. Yet even in this powerful moment of redemption, Arthur felt a subtle, unsettling uncertainty, a quiet intuition whispering softly that this was merely the beginning of an even deeper truth that fate had yet to fully reveal. Suddenly, as if summoned by that very thought, footsteps echoed softly along the gravel pathway nearby. Arthur glanced nervously, his heart quickening with apprehension as another figure emerged slowly into view. Philip Redgrave, Arthur's one-time superior, whose brutal authority had shaped Arthur's own hardened attitudes decades earlier. Arthur felt his pulse quicken sharply once more, sensing with profound certainty that karma's reckoning tonight had yet another chapter to unfold. Philip stood hesitantly beneath the pale glow of moonlight, his eyes dimmed with sorrow and regret. Arthur noticed immediately that Philip was holding another injured animal, a delicate, trembling young owl whose wing was cruelly broken, its fearful eyes wide with pain and confusion. Philip spoke quietly, his voice heavy with guilt and sincerity. "Arthur, tonight fate delivered me this innocent creature, forcing me to see clearly the suffering my cruelty caused, cruelty I taught you, cruelty you passed onward unknowingly. Karma's justice is unmistakable. Tonight, it demands I seek forgiveness, not only from you, but from every soul I've wronged." Arthur felt his heart surge powerfully with empathy, realizing with profound clarity the beauty of karma's justice. The two men, bound by a history of cruelty, pride, and arrogance, now stood humbly before each other, their hands filled not with weapons of authority, but with helpless creatures whose survival depended solely upon their compassion. Arthur spoke softly yet resolutely. "Philip, karma has given us both a chance tonight, not just to confront our past, but to change our future. Tonight, we hold in our hands not just innocent animals needing protection, but the very hope of redemption. Let us carry these creatures towards safety as our first act of true compassion, proof that even hearts hardened by pride can choose kindness." Philip nodded solemnly, deeply moved, accepting Arthur's words with humble sincerity. The two men walked slowly, side by side, carrying gently the fragile lives entrusted to them by fate itself. Yet as they approached the warmth and safety of the castle ahead, Arthur felt again the quiet stirring of uncertainty whispering beneath his newfound peace, warning him gently that karma's final lesson remained hidden, waiting patiently to reveal itself at precisely the moment they least expected. Arthur glanced silently toward the towering silhouette of Windsor Castle, feeling instinctively the gentle warning whispered by the evening breeze, reminding him that true redemption would require not just one night's sincerity, but a lifetime of courageous compassion. He sensed profoundly that karma, in its delicate yet firm wisdom, had only just begun its intricate tapestry of justice and reconciliation, with threads still unseen, truths yet hidden, challenges still waiting quietly in the shadows of tomorrow's uncertain dawn.